Everything begins with a girl who looks like she has a face made of stone. Soon, we see Jinyoung in the school hallway. He retorts awkwardly, internally reinforcing his absolute conviction to see women as if they were rocks. Remembering elementary school, the boy suffered about 20 rejections from his classmates. Being frequently mocked, the excuses for the rejections he received were incredibly varied. As a result, the boy felt immensely sad, not understanding the cause of his unpopularity among the other children. Having lost all self-confidence, he chose to create an imaginary companion to ask for romantic advice. This advisor appears settled on the bed next to him, receiving the nickname Jason. Little Jason's primary advice was simply to visualize all girls as if they were rocks. In this way, the MC spent years repeating this mentalization, training his brain to convince himself of the fantasy. Upon reaching high school, the technique worked, and the female students in fact started to look like stones to his eyes. Returning to the present, Jinyoung passes through the hallway when someone suddenly says his name. The stone-faced classmate asks if he will be free after classes end, showing interest in studying with him. He immediately considers that he shouldn't get his hopes up that she has feelings just because of such an invitation. Being quite direct to avoid complications, he declines the invitation, claiming to be busy at that moment. He continues his way calmly, convinced that living with women has become much simpler thanks to this method. The tactic is obviously effective, since interacting with a rock doesn't require the involvement of feelings. He then turns his gaze to the side in the hallway and asks his imaginary partner if he isn't completely right about this. Jason, who now appears as an extremely muscular, mustachioed man, agrees entirely with his reasoning. Despite the success of the strategy, Jinyoung fears that things might remain this way indefinitely, and he might never manage to have a real relationship. The muscular friend reminds him that both had already decided to abandon any romantic pretension quite a long time ago. Upon leaving school, the boy decides he prefers to stay in his comfort zone rather than risk criticism about his physical appearance. While walking down the street debating self-acceptance, they notice an abandoned cell phone on the sidewalk. Immediately, Jinyoung raises his voice to catch the attention of the person walking ahead. Upon offering the device to the owner, he promptly warns that the object had fallen to the ground. The young woman warns that he likely let the item slip and turns around to express gratitude for the help. Looking back, the true, very beautiful appearance of the student is finally revealed. The MC goes into a state of shock upon staring directly at her face. Without understanding absolutely anything of what he is witnessing, the boy tries to decipher the flaw in his once infallible illusion. The girl observes his gaze with confusion, while the boy panics, trying to understand the origin of that anomaly. The case becomes a huge dilemma, given that it had been a long time since he had seen the face of a real woman. Despair overcomes the teenager, who tries at all costs to maintain serenity in the face of that unexpected circumstance. Noticing the long, awkward silence, the girl asks why he hasn't uttered a single word. Sweating from nervousness, he tries to justify that this exacerbated reaction is only due to lack of habit. However, he ends up being impulsive and lets it slip out loud that she is extremely attractive. The boy freezes instantly as soon as he realizes the embarrassing comment he just made. The girl is clearly surprised by the unusual compliment coming from someone she didn't even know. She thanks him shyly while he hands her the phone and runs away in a panic. Fleeing quickly down the street, he offers an apology without daring to look back. She remains motionless on the sidewalk, observing the bizarre escape and judging the whole interaction as quite strange. Running disoriented through the park, the MC insults himself for the monumental embarrassment he just caused. He cannot accept that he had the audacity to compliment the beauty of a stranger in a few seconds. This becomes a mental nightmare, fearing that the episode will become a reason for heavy gossip within the school. Already during the night, with the temperature dropping, the student reflects on the tragic day in his apartment. Settled in the room, Jason comments that he considered his friend's attitude quite graceful and even gallant. Completely defeated by shame, Jinyoung laments the situation while his muscular friend tries to cheer him up. The boy remains quite intrigued, seeking to discover why that girl is the only one who does not succumb to his visual power. The advisor admits to not having the answer and shifts the focus to the next step. Jinyoung concludes that keeping the situation as it is may result in compromising rumors about him. A traumatic memory of a girl showing disgust toward him emerges, reviving the feeling of having been humiliated. Even after all the rigorous mental training, he deeply laments that a slip of this nature still occurs. Curled in the corner of the room, hugging his knees, the boy feels his tranquility was irremediably shaken. At this instant, the imaginary companion delivers a punch to his friend's head to bring him back to reality. Jinyoung rubs the bump, while Jason orders him to stop freaking out and focus on formulating a survival plan. The boy assesses that the simplest strategy for this mystery is to avoid any meeting with the girl in the hallways. Noticing that she seems to belong to another class, he decides that it is enough to be careful with his movements at school. The next day, while walking near the school, the MC feels confident that the evasion technique will succeed. The atmosphere in the large school courtyard seems serene, signaling the beginning of a common day free of surprises. However, fate intervenes quickly and the beautiful girl appears in front of him, asking with enthusiasm if he recognizes her. The boy gets so scared that he almost loses his balance, confronted with the irony of the universe. Desperate for help, he cries out for his friend, who only suggests staying calm and acting naturally. Disregarding the female students around, he decides to treat the beautiful girl with the same coldness dedicated to the classmates who look like stones. However, he realizes too late that she is commenting precisely on the embarrassing compliment from the day before. The gossip spreads instantly among the other female students, who are shocked by the boy's boldness. Maintaining the pose of a tough, indifferent guy, Jinyoung utters a short sentence, trying to end the subject quickly. Taking advantage of the comic opening, the girl opens a provocative smile and asks if she also looks pretty that day. Without presenting any defense, he remains paralyzed by shame while he hears the group's fun provocations. Without hesitation, he activates his survival instinct and turns his back, fleeing far away from there. The muscular friend approves of the strategic escape, agreeing that staying there would be an invitation to disaster. Upon climbing the stairs hurriedly, he tries not to be shaken, convinced that her laughter was nothing more than mockery. In a moment of lucidity, he alerts himself not to start harboring unfounded romantic expectations. Far away, the girl does not understand the unexpected escape, while Jinyoung swears mentally that he will never meet her again. However, the promises of an afflicted teenager usually have a short duration in the face of the implacable whims of fate. In the crowded school courtyard, the girl's vivid appearance attracts disproportionate attention amidst the stone silhouettes. As soon as she notices his presence and greets him from afar, Jinyoung realizes the danger and sees that there is no way to ignore her. Given this, he hides behind a pillar, accepting that his only option is to live as a fugitive every day. Hidden behind the pillar, the boy murmurs nervously while trying not to be noticed. As soon as the young woman walks straight past, talking to a friend, he takes the opportunity to withdraw discreetly. However, she turns her gaze back, feeling that something unusual was happening in the hall. Already at the end of the afternoon, the student breathes a sigh of relief, believing he had survived the day without major setbacks. While walking through the streets, Jinyoung concludes that this routine is exhausting and determines the need for a new plan. Settled on a park bench, he laments the situation without understanding how the circumstances reached such a point. Suddenly, the girl appears right behind him with a greeting that looks like an ambush. The boy jumps in fright, shouting in fear while she asks, ironically, if she managed to scare him. In this, the MC questions why they keep meeting and decides that he needs to avoid her at all costs. Without losing her rhythm, the student faces the boy and asks directly if he will try to flee again. She states that his attitude is surprising since she tries to be nice, and he spends all his time ignoring her. Furthermore, the girl notices that he avoids eye contact and flees constantly, questioning if she made some mistake. Holding the straps of his backpack, Jinyoung tries to defend himself, alleging that she is the one who acts in a very strange way. He enters a mental panic due to this new misunderstanding and tries, quickly, to conceive a convincing excuse. Pressed by her gaze, the boy stutters continuously, trying to explain the reason for his bizarre behavior. Desperate for an immediate answer, he looks around, sees the other students with stone faces and tries to formulate a sentence. Without pondering, Jinyoung ends up confessing that all the other girls look like rocks to him, with the exception of her. The student remains in silence for a brief moment, digesting the unusual declaration she heard. The teenager turns his face instantly, realizing the huge faux pas he just committed. In thought, he calls for Jason, while the muscular friend reacts with total dismay to the critical communication failure. The young woman blinks, surprised, processing the weight of those curious words. Faced with this, the boy's hands start to shake uncontrollably due to nervousness. He remains static, sweating and trembling intensely, awaiting the rejection he considers imminent. However, a small smile starts to form discreetly on her face. She then opens a radiant smile, finding the whole situation incredibly adorable. Approaching, the student asks for his name and confirms it as soon as he replies, stuttering. She leans her body toward him, asking in a soft tone if she can say so. Touching the boy's chin delicately, she warns that the sentence he just uttered was a beautiful flirtation. Satisfied with the interaction, she withdraws calmly, leaving the MC totally shocked on the sidewalk. Immersed in thoughts, he remembers the exact moment he received the golden advice from his friend in childhood. Observing the young woman walking away, the MC realizes that the basic rule of treating women like rocks failed miserably. His heart accelerates, defying the second rule: never create expectations. Tightening his own shirt, the student admits that his emotional blockage was completely annihilated. In the blink of an eye, his mind projects a whole life with the girl, imagining marriage, children, and old age together. The imaginary partner delivers a slap to Jinyoung's face, trying to pull him out of that disastrous illusion. Already sitting on the floor of the room, the boy tries to justify himself, stating that it is normal to become destabilized upon seeing the first real face in 5 years. Recognizing that the escape tactic is no longer effective, he asks the advisor about the next step. Pointing his finger firmly, Jason decrees that in critical situations like this, the essential thing is to define a clear objective. The big guy explains that seeing the students as rocks made the boy lose any sensitivity, maintaining his cold posture. This protective barrier was the triumph that ensured Jinyoung would never get hurt because of a girl. However, with the unexpected appearance of a real woman, the terrible side effect of all his training finally manifested. The friend emphasizes that the lack of immunity to a real female face was the perfect trigger to expose the most immature facet of the boy. Jinyoung agrees with the analysis, fearing that the loss of control might result in the same humiliating traumas of the past. The advisor reassures the situation, ensuring that there is a solution and that the focus now should be on maintaining posture before her. The next day, the school routine restarts with the students enjoying the morning in the immense school courtyard. Forcing his vision through the hallway, the MC stares at a fixed point in the distance with a quite tense expression. On the other side of the courtyard, the beautiful student quickly notices the piercing gaze fixed on her. The young woman's friend warns enthusiastically that Jinyoung is staring at her but finds the expression strange, thinking he seems irritated. Hidden behind a pillar, he reviews with his imaginary partner that this is the great desensitization plan. The idea consists of staring at the girl until the brain gets used to it, but Jason suggests that he try to sketch a smile. Following the tip, the teenager tries to look friendlier but ends up forcing a quite bizarre smile. The young woman is visibly disconcerted upon noticing that weird expression coming from the end of the hallway. Ignoring the strangeness, the friend exults with joy, warning that he just smiled at her, leaving the student speechless. In thought, the girl questions why he is being so explicit, imagining that she wouldn't notice the staring. Undoing the weird smile, Jinyoung deduces that the distance is excessive for anyone to notice the details of his face. Worried about generating unwanted rumors by acting like a lunatic, he decides to back away. The student only observes in silence the boy turn his back and leave mysteriously once again. In this, the meddlesome friend starts a conversation, wanting to know if the young woman named Sujung knows the reputation of that student. She guarantees that Jinyoung is very popular at school and that several students have already tried some romantic approach with him. However, the great mystery that surrounds the boy is that he shows not the slightest interest in absolutely anyone. The colleague highlights that this posture of cool and independent guy is exactly what, ironically, attracts female attention. Curious, she questions directly if Sujung is developing some interest in him just for having been observed. Trying to disguise it, the girl looks away quickly and denies the insinuation, saying she has nothing to do with it. However, the memory of the unusual confession at the end of the afternoon does not leave the student's mind. Touching her lips with a mischievous smile, Sujung admits that there is a small detail occupying her thoughts. In another place, the MC stares at the classroom sign while calling his imaginary advisor. Already inside the room, he reflects better on the situation and concludes that desensitization plan is not so effective. Sitting at the table, Jinyoung explains that the idea of getting used to the girl's face requires him to chase her constantly. The boy realizes that following the young woman from afar and staring fixedly is typical behavior of a stalker. The muscular big guy reflects on the argument and questions if his friend is serious. Instead of looking like a creep, the student suggests that trying to find the girl's social media would be much better. Jason approves of the change in strategy, encouraging his friend to approach the young woman immediately to ask for her contact. The teenager panics at the idea of asking in person, fearing an awkward atmosphere. Trying to build up courage in the empty hallway, he stutters while rehearsing how to ask for her profile naturally. However, fate acts quickly, and Sujung appears walking down the hallway exactly at the moment of the rehearsal. The young woman accepts the unusual request instantly. Excited, the boy takes her cell phone, warning that he will type in the profile, while Sujung comments that he seems to be handling it well. Upon recovering the device, the student says she will take a look. She remains in silence for an instant before letting out a murmur of confusion. The newly created profile on the screen contains absolutely no photo or follower. Soon, Sujung questions if he just created that account, leaving Jinyoung sweating coldly upon confirming the suspicion. Trying to justify himself, the teenager explains that he doesn't usually use social media and asks if there is any problem with that. The girl simply bursts out laughing, leaving the boy without understanding the reason for so much amusement. She quickly unravels the riddle and concludes that the boy went after her the exact second he created the profile. The MC remains static in the hallway, feeling the weight of that impeccable deduction. In shock, he realizes the huge faux pas he committed and how he left his intentions evident. While the young woman finds the situation hilarious, he laments having focused so much on the goal to the point of forgetting the basics. Desperate, Jinyoung calls for Jason in thought, feeling that his disguise went down the drain. Stuttering a lot, the student tries to invent a lame excuse that she was just the first person he found. However, the terrible excuse only makes the student laugh even more at his face. Trying to maintain the little dignity that remained, the boy asks her to stop the laughter. In a provocative tone, the young woman holds the cell phone and asks if he isn't also curious to know her number. The shock hits Jinyoung in full face before that direct advance. Sweating from nervousness, he tries to formulate an answer, but the words simply do not come out. Giving a friendly punch on his arm, Sujung warns that it is only a joke and that she loves the exaggerated reactions of her colleague. She returns the device, stating that she has already followed him back on the social network. Upon leaving through the hallway, the student asks him to like her photos a lot, while the boy agrees in an awkward way. The teenager remains alone in the middle of the path, trying to process the hurricane that had just passed. Immediately, his mind projects a complete movie of a romantic future alongside the girl. Trying to keep his feet on the ground, the MC orders himself to stop those dangerous illusions. The day ends and the night falls quietly over the huge school building. Already in the comfort of her room, the beautiful girl relaxes, lying on the bed. Looking at the cell phone screen, she lets out a giggle, finding what she sees very funny. The reason for the laughter is the extremely stiff selfie that Jinyoung used as his profile photo. Simultaneously, the teenager squirms with shame in bed, regretting his actions. A notification shines on the screen, indicating that Sujung's photo has just received a like. Silence dominates the early morning in the student's residential neighborhood. The next day at school, a colleague is shocked to discover that Jinyoung requested her friend's social network. Finding it funny, Sujung confirms the story and adds the detail of the newly created account. Intrigued, the meddlesome colleague stands up, claiming to feel a great curiosity. She recalls the boy's fame of not caring about anyone, concluding that he only acts specially with Sujung. The young woman becomes thoughtful with the comment, while the colleague notices Jinyoung walking nearby. The friend proposes to perform a quick test to confirm if the rumor is, in fact, true. Walking quietly through the hallway, the MC is surprised by a scandalous scream right behind him. Making an extremely dramatic pose on the floor, the colleague warns out loud that she just fell. With a pleading look, she repeats that she hurt herself a lot in the fall. In her mind, the perfect plan involves the boy running to help her stand up like a gentleman. However, the MC's spell remains active, and he sees the girl thrown on the floor as a mere stone statue. Without a hint of empathy, the teenager lifts the colleague by the collar of her jacket, letting out a grunt of disgust. Without looking back, he continues his path normally, leaving the girl paralyzed in the hall. The colleague tries to recover her posture, while Sujung starts to laugh at the pathetic scene. Laughing a lot, the beautiful student jokes that the boy pulled her like a turnip in the garden. Humiliated, the colleague curses the MC in thought. The school day advances with the students enjoying the break in the open air. Walking near the track, the teenager questions the advisor if he should have already gotten used to the young woman's face. He confesses that he cannot stop looking at the student whenever an opportunity arises. Analyzing the photos on his cell phone, the boy realizes that her beauty seems like a novelty at every reunion. The mustachioed imaginary friend suggests that they need to discover the true reason for this immunity. The MC forces his mind to understand why only that student escapes his visual illusion. Stopping on the path, he lets out a fake cough while trying to formulate a plausible theory. Further ahead, Sujung observes another colleague from a distance and murmurs that the situation seems a bit complicated. Turning her face suddenly, the beautiful girl notices the presence of the MC standing nearby. She calls Jinyoung's name and approaches calmly, catching the teenager completely off guard. The boy grunts quietly, irritated by constantly getting scared by her sudden approach. Upon being asked what he is doing standing there, he explains that he needs to take the bus home, but is out of money. Curious, the student asks where he lives and is surprised to hear the name of the condominium. The young woman points out that the place is close and feasible on foot, but Jinyoung stutters, saying it is not something so simple. She keeps her gaze fixed on her colleague, waiting patiently for a better explanation. In an ironic tone, the girl suggests that the difficulty in walking might be due to chronic anemia. Taking money from her purse, she offers to pay for his bus fare, leading the teenager to panic, making him refuse immediately. Giving little pats on his shoulder, the young woman tells him to simply accompany her walking home. Seeing the boy's hesitation, the student takes the lead and warns that he cannot abandon her there. The boy is completely stunned by the sudden invitation for them to go home together. The end of the afternoon paints the neighborhood sky with warm colors while both begin the walk. Side by side on the sidewalk, the beautiful girl starts an incessant conversation during the whole journey. Sweating from nervousness, Jinyoung cannot process absolutely anything she is saying. Noticing the distraction, she asks if he is listening, while the boy laments the situation internally. The walk continues through the busy streets, leaving the MC in an absurd discomfort. Immediately, an old memory resurfaces about a colleague from the past who always walked the same way back. In the memory, some children would pass by pointing and asking the reason for him walking side by side with the girl. In the painful memory, other children appeared asking if the two were dating, making the girl scream in despair that they had nothing to do with each other. With anger, she questions out loud who in their right mind would date someone like him. After that terrible day, the girl never came home with the boy again, and everything ended without him being able to confess. Back to the present, the MC concludes that the whole situation leaves him very uncomfortable, wishing only that the walk ends soon. Walking further ahead, the student comments that she usually takes the bus, so this will probably not happen again. Mentally exhausted, he lets out a heavy sigh while they continue up the hill. Suddenly, the beautiful girl falls sitting on the floor, breathless, making the teenager scream her name in shock. Scared by the fall, the boy asks what is wrong and if she tripped over something along the way. Breathing with difficulty, the young woman curses the steep street and recalls suffering from chronic anemia. Extending a trembling hand, she asks for help to walk, being promptly attended to. In this, he pulls her with caution, advising her to go slowly, while the colleague thanks him for the support. Leaning on the boy, the young woman complains of dizziness, while the teenager's mind short-circuits upon realizing they are holding hands. The student continues breathing heavily, evidencing her lack of energy. Faced with the scene, the MC questions out loud what exactly she was trying to do moments ago. Soon, the teenager's mind remembers the exact moment he lifted the meddlesome colleague by the collar of her jacket, without pity. The beautiful girl bursts into laughter when remembering the ridiculous scene she witnessed in the school hallway. Pointing, she comments laughing that he pulled the girl like a radish in the garden, while the boy asks who that person is. Upon arriving at the destination, the teenager warns that he is home and suggests that they say goodbye right there. Both wave, with the MC feeling an immense relief for that torture having reached its end. Turning his back and following his path, he grunts quietly that was an incredibly uncomfortable moment. Thanking God, Jinyoung prays that the student has money for the bus the next day and that will not happen again. Walking through the streets illuminated by the sunset, he hopes she deals with the anemia soon so that his imagination stops creating illusions. The end of the afternoon continues quietly in the residential neighborhood. However, suddenly, the young woman lets out a small murmur upon realizing a detail. Turning her face, the student warns that she almost forgot to say something very important. She shouts enthusiastically the MC's name in the middle of the street, making the boy jump in fright. Looking back, Jinyoung waits for the next news with great nervousness. The girl warns that it will take a while for her to receive her allowance, so she is already counting on his help tomorrow as well. The impact of the news leaves the teenager breathless and static in place. In thought, he laments wanting only to run away from her, while Jason appears sitting on the floor, claiming to be curious about something. The young woman finds the colleague's terrified reaction strange, asking what kind of bizarre expression that is. Without supporting the pressure, the boy lets out a groan of weakness and collapses to the floor. Immediately after, the student sits on the sidewalk, completely breathless after the physical effort. Worried, she asks if he is okay and curses her own running, ordering the teenager to remain seated. Later in the room, Jason resumes yesterday's subject, wanting to know why only that girl does not look like a rock. Sitting on the floor, the MC reflects on the mysterious student who appeared out of nowhere, immune to his visual illusion. With the muscular friend relaxing by his side, the boy claims to have formulated a strong theory about the case. Confident, he believes faithfully in having finally unraveled the great mystery. However, upon revealing the answer, the teenager hesitates and lets out only a confused murmur. The advisor asks if that is really the only reason, but Jinyoung admits to not being able to think of anything else. Grabbing his backpack hurriedly, the student warns that they will talk better on the way, as they need to go to school. With everything ready, he opens the room door, prepared to face one more school day. The MC walks slowly through the hallway, attentive to his surroundings. In the living room, the father appears standing, in silence, demonstrating extreme physical fatigue. Breaking the heavy atmosphere, Jinyoung gives a small bow and wishes a good morning, embarrassed. Trying to be polite, the boy asks if his father has already eaten, warning that he will skip breakfast for lack of hunger. The man warns that his mother prepared stew, making his son promise that he will eat upon returning. While the teenager walks to the exit, his father insists that he feed himself properly before class. Without animation, the student warns that he is leaving and opens the front door. A feeling of discouragement takes over the MC early in the morning. Walking toward school, he talks internally, commenting on his imaginary friend's theory. With Jason on his shoulder, Jinyoung deduces that he is destined to be dragged by the girl, it being inevitable. Accelerating his pace, he prays that the theory is wrong, while his partner asks him not to worry so much. Suddenly, an aggressive voice echoes along the way, calling the MC's full name. Standing in front of him, the colleague in the yellow jacket waits with arms crossed, in an intimidating posture. Full of sass, the girl warns, without beating around the bush, that she is about to hit him. Without expressing concern, the teenager only asks the reason for the free threat. The girl reveals that she spent the night practicing low kicks just to make him suffer, while he asks who she is. Indignant at his colleague's amnesia, she recalls the embarrassment she went through in the hallway and shouts that she was humiliated. In the offended girl's mind, the scene of him lifting her by the collar like a vegetable is an unforgivable crime. Raising 3 fingers, the colleague warns that she will be generous and give only 3 low kicks, ordering him to get ready. The boy prepares for the mess, trying to understand why he needs to go through such an ordeal. Before she can attack, the teenager acts fast and lands a kick on her leg, eliciting a scream of pain. Whimpering, the girl limps and grumbles, while the MC provokes, asking if she will give up. She, however, recovers and enters an attack position, claiming to be very fast for not having anemia like the other student. Without patience for that show, Jinyoung judges the girl's attitude with contempt. Like an out-of-control bull, the girl in the yellow jacket advances at high speed toward her opponent. The teenager raises his fists, sweating coldly, feeling a rolling rock about to run him over. The girl approaches with fury, celebrating having finally reached the kid. Preparing the special attack, the colleague focuses on his legs and announces the low kick. The MC is surprised by the speed and aggressiveness of the sudden movement. At this critical instant, the beautiful girl opens the nearby gate, complaining about the noise and wanting to know what is happening. Without time to break, the kick of the girl in the yellow jacket hits the newcomer's leg in full with brutal impact. The victim of the blow remains paralyzed, only processing the absurd pain she suffered. Seeing the tragedy caused, the aggressor freezes and lets out a murmur of dread. Seonwoo falls to the floor, holding her ankle, while the aggressor shouts the victim's name in despair. The MC goes into shock upon witnessing the tragic scene. Trying to run to help the student, he slips ridiculously on the smooth floor. With the slip, the boy loses his balance and is thrown back in the hall. The impact is such that he falls face first on the floor, breaking his own nose. In this, the 3 teenagers are thrown on the school floor, composing a pathetic scene. The girl in the yellow jacket freezes in shame, not knowing how to remedy the disaster. Already in the infirmary, the culprit apologizes repeatedly for the absurd accident. The 2 wounded rest side by side on the stretchers to recover. The young woman comments that the aggressive colleague was always a bit strange, but guarantees she feels much better. Noticing that he was left alone with the girl again, the teenager calls his imaginary partner. Jason appears, calmly drinking tea, alerting his friend not to allow his strange side to dominate the situation. Focused on the mission, Jinyoung reviews mentally the need to maintain absolute calm alone with his colleague. He pleads with himself, hoping not to utter any embarrassing nonsense. Breaking the silence, Seonwoo turns on the stretcher and asks calmly what the lunch menu will be. The student tries to recall the menu and replies awkwardly, leaving his colleague excited about the meal. Sitting on the edge of the stretcher, he mentions skipping breakfast, making the girl notice that he must be starving. She vents about preferring to leave early for finding it uncomfortable to be near her own father in the mornings. Trying to listen well, the teenager advises his colleague to try to improve the complicated family relationship. Suddenly, the MC's mind is taken by a random memory of the previous confusion. He remembers the fateful first encounter with the young woman, where he let it slip unintentionally that she was beautiful. On that occasion, he tried to convince himself that the confession was due only to the lack of use of female faces. Staring at his colleague, he finally throws in the towel and admits to himself that she is simply wonderful. Noticing the fixed gaze, the student opens a provocative smile and asks if she is too pretty for him to handle. The boy enters into despair, waving his hands while trying to invent an excuse. With a red face and accelerated heart, Jinyoung realizes he has become the target of her jokes. Laughing at that exacerbated reaction, the beautiful girl settles in the bed, claiming to love teasing her colleague. He remains confused by the direct declaration, while the young woman guarantees to be 100% sincere. The student jokes that any pressure is enough to make him freak out and utter bizarre sentences. Consumed by shame, the MC lowers his head, asking for forgiveness, but she warns it is not necessary. With a gentle smile, Seonwoo confesses that she finds his clumsy way very cute. The impact of this compliment leaves the teenager paralyzed, questioning if his imaginary partner was always right. In this, a memory of his advisor formulating the great theory about the student's visual immunity resurfaces. The mustachioed big guy explains with seriousness that the real reason for this anomaly is extremely simple. The deduction points out that the MC fell madly in love with the young woman at first sight. Taking his tea with elegance, Jason reinforces that no other logical explanation exists. Little by little, a reflective silence takes over the infirmary while the teenager absorbs the weight of the revelation. Outside there, time passes slowly through the courtyard during the recovery period. Later in the hallways, the girl in the yellow jacket grabs the MC from behind, announcing the time for the lesson. Xianwu appears irritated, demanding that her colleague take the blame, while the boy begs to be released. Furious with the injustice, the student advances shouting, prepared to solve the problem by brute force. Without hesitation, she lands a kick on the aggressor, generating a scary impact. Caught in the crossfire, poor Jinyoung is thrown back, without processing the brawl. Fallen, the teenager questions the theory of love at first sight, doubting such strong feelings. Still confused, he stares at the student's back and murmurs her name with uncertainty. Suddenly, a terrifying vision attacks the boy's mind, where the beautiful young woman stares at him with disgust and contempt. In the hallucination, the student utters cruel words, calling her colleague a pathetic loser. Jinyoung wakes up suddenly in the early morning, breathless and trembling after the nightmare. Pulling in air, he tries to calm his heartbeats, accepting that it was just a bad dream. The imaginary partner appears sitting in the chair, wearing blue pajamas, noticing that his friend is out of breath. Dejected, the teenager stares at the floor and confesses the nightmare, where he was hated by the girl. Jason deduces that the old traumas of rejection are haunting his mind. The boy reveals that the nightmare repeats for several nights, leaving the big guy intrigued. He laments that the nightly dread began after the theory of love at first sight. Raising a finger, the counselor analyzes that if the passion is true, his friend suffers from a platonic love. With seriousness, the partner warns that this overwhelming failing is only fear. Trying to help, Jason gives a thumbs up and recites an ancient proverb about knowing the enemy. The next day at school, the teenager interprets the advice, concluding he needs to investigate the student's life. Walking through the hallways, he realizes he knows nothing about her and considers espionage the perfect tactic. After a short walk, the MC stops at the door of room 5, territory of the beautiful young woman. Peeking, the boy confesses nervousness, while Jason tells him to stop trembling. The MC sweeps the interior of the room, analyzing each desk in search of the target. Frustrated by her absence, he raises the hypothesis of her having gone to the bathroom. Willing to obtain information, Jinyoung catches the attention of the first student he finds. The chubby colleague stares at the intruder with boredom, complaining about him blocking the path to his desk. Surprised by the lack of manners, the teenager tries to process the mood. Avoiding confusion, he apologizes and takes a step to the side. The counselor clenches his teeth, wishing to break the face of the cocky kid. Calmly, Jinyoung points to the neighboring chair and asks if his colleague knows where the student is. Adjusting his glasses with arrogance, the boy murmurs that idiots looking for her are something common. In a tone of mockery, the student criticizes the boys who fall in love with superficial women. The MC closes his expression, feeling disgusted by that sexist discourse. Losing his head, the big guy draws a machine gun while the boy begs for patience. Almost cursing, the teenager breathes deeply and demands the answer. Without interest in helping, the chubby guy mocks the impossibility of tracking someone who utters oddities. Jinyoung warns coldly not to speak ill of the beautiful girl. The boy with glasses murmurs that the teenager is also at his worst. The MC stands up and orders the colleague to stand up. Complaining of laziness, Juman gets up from the chair, finding the movement tiring. Taking the opportunity, Jinyoung attacks his opponent using his jacket as a weapon. The blow hits the arrogant boy's face in full. Without defending himself, he receives another blow that makes him stagger. The attack punishing the gossip continues without pity. Xianwu opens the door, questioning the bizarre noise. The young woman greets the teenager while he freezes upon seeing her. To justify himself, he says he hit the chubby guy for having spoken ill of her. Surprisingly, the student authorizes the beating, stating that the student is inconvenient. Juman grumbles, trying to understand the hatred, while the MC disguises his anger. The beautiful girl reveals, relaxed, that she and the assaulted one are longtime friends. The teenager repeats the information in shock, while the colleague trembles with fear. The dust settles after the confusion in the room. Sitting together, Jinyoung apologizes and the boy guarantees it didn't hurt. The MC confirms the old friendship, and Juman reports knowing the young woman since they were 3. The teenager concludes this is the chance to investigate the young woman's life and unravel the mystery. However, the colleague warns that he should give up if he has an interest in the student. Juman explains that the girl is popular and attracts crowds all the time. Despite this, he highlights that the success rate of the suitors is 0. The teenager murmurs that he already imagined it, due to the number of followers she has. He suggests that none of those were her type, and the chubby guy agrees. Intrigued, Jinyoung questions the reason for his colleague having told him to give up. Juman recalls childhood, explaining he attended the same school. Spending so much time together, things changed in elementary school. The chubby guy narrates a moment where he called his friend by a common insult between them. With a slouchy attitude, he ordered the girl to buy bread in the cafeteria. However, the unusual reaction left him paralyzed and scared. The young woman only called his name, making him feel something very wrong in her personality. Despite smiling as always, that no longer seemed like the gentle girl. Until today, Juman guarantees that the weird sensation about her behavior never disappeared. The boy concludes that this bizarre instinct is the reason for advising him to stay away. Intrigued, Jinyoung questions what that cited sensation would be. Walking, the teenager reflects on never having felt bad energy coming from the young woman. He decides to ignore the warning, treating everything as a personal opinion. Suddenly, the pair stops when the chubby guy notices something interesting. Nearby, Seonwoo appears walking with her friend, who questions the proximity of the two. Juman starts a conversation, while the MC tries to invent an excuse. Without a filter, the colleague shoots that they were speaking ill of her. The MC panics with the betrayal, questioning the boy's problem. A silence dominates the hallway until the student questions the veracity. She faces Jinyoung, forcing him to deny the story quickly. The meddlesome colleague laughs, while Seonwoo refuses the lie. Ignoring the mood, the chubby guy insists on the provocation. Losing patience, Jinyoung attacks the boy, ordering him to shut his mouth. Without defense, the insolent colleague takes another blow. With the impact of the clothing, the boy gets beaten in the hallway without being able to flee. Jason appears armed with a machine gun, approving the protection of the girl's honor. The colleague does not understand the brawl, while Seonwoo turns her back. Leaving, the beautiful girl opens an enigmatic smile. The day comes to an end under the sunlight. Walking through the streets, the MC concludes that his situation became terrible. Frustrated, he laments discovering nothing and blames his colleague for the misunderstanding. Remembering the dark instinct of the young woman, he promises to annihilate the chubby guy. Interrupting the reflection, someone touches his shoulder, calling his name. The student appears beside him with a smile, charging for explanations about the gossip. The boy gets scared and stutters her name, caught by surprise. Out of breath, he grumbles about her sudden appearances. Finding it funny, the young woman lets out a provocative giggle. Jinyoung denies the gossip, but she reassures him, saying she already knows. Giving little pats on his back, she guarantees she trusts that he would never insult her. Changing the subject, she orders him to accompany her because she is out of money for the bus. Exhausted, the MC sighs when imagining the suffering to climb the hill. He reflects that he did not speak ill of her, but was trying to discover secrets. To avoid problems, Jinyoung keeps the plan a secret and agrees, nervous. Accepting his fate, the teenager accepts his emotional defeat. Faced with the hill, the young woman complains about hating climbing streets. The student doubts that the incline is difficult, irritating her with his ignorance. She lists her pains and lack of breath from anemia, leaving the boy feeling sorry. Using the medical excuse, the young woman demands that he push her back on the hill. Without patience, she forces her colleague to support his hands on her. Trembling, he supports his hands with extreme care on her delicate back. Pushing her like an engine, he checks if the work is functioning and she celebrates the relief. Due to the fatigue of the walk, the student laughs softly and comments that the contact tickles her, leaving the MC tense and stuttering when questioning her about it. In a serene way, the young woman confirms what she felt, justifying that she possesses a certain sensitivity when they touch her back. Immediately, the boy's mind enters despair, judging the situation as terrible due to the provocative attitudes of his partner. For a short period, the young man stays thoughtful and silent, internally evaluating a considerable chance. In his mind, Jinyoung visualizes the girl as a fragile flower and concludes that it would be excellent to possess enough intimacy to maintain a relaxed bond. Going further into the daydream, he fantasizes about the moment he would climb that hill carrying the beautiful young woman on his back. The strong partner claps his hands for the passionate fantasy, considering the scene adorable, and the boy promptly supports his friend's opinion. Without losing his posture, Jinyoung declares that fantasizing to this extent is tolerable, given that he didn't go so far as to imagine the names of his grandchildren. Jason supports his colleague, stating that he has freedom to dream of whatever he desires, until a sudden call interrupts the illusion. In despair, Seonwoo yells for her friend, protesting against his accelerated pushes and saying that she will end up losing her life. The scare hits the poor boy in full force. In a panic, the boy apologizes continuously, admitting to having lost focus for an instant, while the young woman tries to recover her breath. However, the young man freezes suddenly upon observing his surroundings and realizing something unexpected. Stagnant at the summit of the hill, the urban landscape under the sunset light shows itself dazzling. leading Jinyoung to contemplate the view. He observes how pleasant it is to have such a wide field of vision, inferring that there must be the girl's neighborhood. Upon noticing a detail nearby, the young man blinks disoriented and asks what it is about. Marveling at the landscape, Jinyoung confesses that he never imagined there was a place like that in the vicinity of his house, and the young woman feels admired for being his debut there. The young man reiterates that all that altitude is not appropriate for someone with chronic anemia to climb, and the student agrees immediately. The young woman says that her fatigue is his fault and that she still has to walk to her residence, threatening him in a playful way before asking for forgiveness. The teenager only contemplates her silently, assimilating the beauty of that instant of peace. Already positioned at the viewpoint, the hero communicates that he will ignore the fatigue only this time, given that she led him to such a cool place. However, the boy's focus is suddenly captured by a different element. Feeling the light breeze, Seonwoo agrees that the urban view is indeed beautiful. Fascinated, the boy cannot avert his gaze and becomes completely mesmerized by her company. That worrying alert from Juman about the girl having a dark nature resurfaces in his head. However, Jinyoung remains confused. Staring fixedly at his colleague, he concludes that if the inability to see anything else besides her is something bizarre, then he was also infected. Seeking a solution, the young man turns his face and chooses to break the silence to clarify a pending subject. Jinyoung pronounces the young woman's name with a more serious intonation, causing her to turn to listen to him. Incapable of hiding the facts, he admits that he did in fact chat about her with the chubby friend earlier, which catches her by surprise. She asks if the young man spoke negative things about her. In a panic, the young man waves his hands, refuting any malicious rumor. In the attempt to justify himself, the protagonist recounts that he merely ended up discovering about the old childhood relationship between the two. Taken by embarrassment, the young man confesses to have acted like that for possessing a great desire to know more details about her. The beautiful young woman shows she is quite shocked by her colleague's frankness, staring at him in complete silence. Noticing the tension in the air, Jinyoung argues that the conversation sounded like gossip, but swears on his own life that he did not utter malice. Extremely nervous, he vents that his only intention was to prevent the young woman from creating a misunderstanding about his character. After the confession, a brief silence predominates while the young woman processes those intense words. Smiling gently, Seonwoo understands the situation and asks him not to worry about nonsense, ensuring that the subject has already been forgot. Calmer, the young man asks if this is in fact true, and the student confirms with enthusiasm, suggesting that they return home. Afflicted with her health, the boy asks if she can go down the hill on her own, but the young woman guarantees there is no problem at all. From a distance, Seonwoo shows gratitude for his company until there and says goodbye, while Jinyoung returns the wave in an awkward way. Alone on the street, the young man sighs deeply, feeling as if all his energy had been drained at once. The illusory companion appears reflective in the chair, observing that the young woman's attitude is indeed very complex to decipher. The young man starts to question himself, doubting if he needed to have been so sincere. Jason asks about his friend's hesitation. The big guy understands his partner's side, but advises that in certain occasions the ideal is to remain quiet and let the adversities pass. While the young woman makes her return journey, the counselor reflects on what exactly would be passing through her mind. On the empty street, the young woman walks with a very calm posture, keeping her own thoughts a secret. The protagonist follows sunk in his regrets, reliving his own fervent excuse of wanting to know her more deeply. In another place, the girl walks thoughtfully and realizes that Jinyoung possesses the strange talent of hitting her heart suddenly with those words. The student continues her lonely journey along the long path of the residential neighborhood, appearing quite serene. However, the lie about the illness quickly takes its toll, and the young woman collapses to her knees on the sidewalk, complaining of the total lack of breath. A new school day begins with the sun shining intensely over the vast school complex. The imaginary companion appears abruptly, demonstrating enormous shock at an unprecedented action by his friend. Wearing sports attire, Jinyoung confirms to Jason that he will return to playing soccer after a long inactive period. The strong partner approves the initiative, motivating the young man to sweat a lot to become a real man on the field. In the middle of his confident walk, the boy notices a flaw in the floor and interrupts his steps immediately. His shoelace ended up untying suddenly right in the center of the hole. Without hesitation, he bends down quickly to tie his footwear before continuing with his path. However, someone almost bumps into the crouching boy and lets out a grunt of fright and irritation. An individual with a scary look asks about his audacity of being there crouching and utters the young man's name in a threatening tone. The person named Han Joel warns that he almost had a fatal fall and questions if the young man has a desire to die. Completely static with fear on the floor, the young man stammers Han Joel's name, noticing the nearby threat. The terrifying being holds the young man's head firmly, ordering him to lower his vision right at that hour, leaving him disoriented. The young man asks the reason for this strange demand, and Hanjeol questions if he really needs a justification. In a ruthless way, Hanjeol says that he looks terrible when looked at from below, highlighting that women hate being stared at under this perspective. Adopting a threatening posture, the individual warns that the circumstance is shameful and insults the boy without mercy. Upon withdrawing, the adult orders the boy never to interrupt his path out of nowhere again. Jinyoung follows stretched on the floor, assimilating the free and severe insult he suffered a little while ago. The young man considers that this has no relevance, given that he stared at the person like a scary rock, and fears that fighting back would cost him his life. Among the petrified women, he deduces that the mirage appeared exclusively from his immense fear of rejection. In order to ensure that he would never relive the suffering of being rejected, he determined that he needed to isolate himself from everything. With the backing of the imaginary companion, the young man focused blindly on personal improvement, exercising his physique and studying hard to evolve. As a result of such constant effort, Jinyoung fires a very strong kick at the ball during the game. The hit is so powerful that the goalkeeper does not have the slightest chance to prevent it, and the ball shakes the net in a formidable goal. The members of the team celebrate the play with enthusiasm, involving the boy in hugs and demonstrating gratitude for his presence in the class. Excited, Jumin yells that they will massacre the rival class this way, while Jinyoung only stares at the chubby guy without saying anything. However, the young man's focus is soon altered upon hearing a known voice and noticing that Seonwoo is arriving. His companion talks about the boys playing ball while grumbling about the smell of sweat in the class. Shortly after, she indicates with excitement that Jinyoung is also participating in the game. With this, a group of students sighs enchanted upon seeing the match from afar. Settled in the bleachers, the girls agree that the boy has a great highlight. Paying attention to the movement, Sunwoo pronounces the colleague's name in her mind. The partner emphasizes that the boy is quite quiet, however he acquires a stylish aura when practicing sports. She still makes compliments to the young man's magnetic energy, whereas Sunwoo considers those fans a bit shameful. Curious about such fame, the friend asks the reason for so much success. The beautiful young woman reflects on the question, believing that all this charm is a great exaggeration. Immediately, Sunwoo's memory brings up the boy's super clumsy and cowardly postures, forcing her to contain her laughter. However, in the end, the young woman admits in silence that he does indeed possess his attraction. The school bell rings loudly, signaling the end of the game and the excellent effort of everyone. The teammates celebrate the great triumph derived from Jinyoung's talent and schedule to play again the next day. Tired, the boy opts to refresh himself at the sink outside before returning to the study room. The young man turns on the water and lets the faucet gush to relieve himself from the suffocating heat. Wetting his face in the cold water, Jinyoung seeks to recover his breath after the intense physical exhaustion. Very close nearby, Jumin praises the formidable kick the boy took in the game. The chubby young man reveals that he never thought there would be someone capable of scoring a goal against his defense. Drying his face, the protagonist returns the compliment, saying that his colleague acted in an excellent way as a goalkeeper. Totally devoid of animation, Jumin declares to be feeling extremely harmed by the situation. Creating a suspenseful mood, the boy asks if Jinyoung knows about the dark part of soccer, however the teenager ignores him. The chubby friend protests, saying that the blame for the team's defeats falls entirely on the shoulders of the goalkeeper. He describes the disappointment of holding several balls and missing only one, saying he hates his colleague for that reason. Without catching the meaning, Jinyoung asks why, and the archer reveals that the big flaw was not having blocked that shot. Irritated with the impertinence, Jason appears with an axe in his hands, forcing the young man to ask for tranquility from his imaginary companion. Using the water that was in his hand, Jinyoung says calmly that he possesses a special surprise for his slouchy colleague. In a fast gesture, he throws the cold liquid directly at the chubby boy's face. Jumin jumps enormously with the unexpected bath, while the boy makes fun of his disproportionate reaction. Full of anger at the attitude, the chubby boy insults the teenager, calling him crazy, and swears revenge. Both start a true water battle in the open area, throwing liquid all over the place like children. From a distance, the colleague notices Jinyoung chasing Jumin and uttering threats regarding cooking pork. Sunwoo gets confused, informing that she is not able to hear the shouting from where she is. Instigated by the mess, the friend drags the beautiful young woman to check closely what the pair is doing. Completely exhausted by the wet battle, the two boys park in the center of the courtyard, gasping for air with difficulty. Jinyoung complains that he feels dirty and that his clothes are entirely wet because of his partner. The chubby boy proposes, without any embarrassment, that they take off their shirts to squeeze the water out of the fabric right there. Exhausting his patience, the young man declares that he will beat his colleague after classes and starts to undress. Abruptly, Sunwoo's voice resonates in the courtyard, questioning the reason for the two continuing outside the classroom. The boy freezes and takes an immense scare upon realizing that the young woman is present exactly at that instant. The two students demonstrate great astonishment upon finding their colleague there, without his shirt. While the partner observes Jinyoung's ripped abs, Sunwoo directs her vision exclusively to Jumin's uncovered belly. The chubby young man panics upon noticing that the beautiful girl is looking fixedly at his uncovered belly. The young women observe the lamentable state of the chubby boy under an atmosphere of intense judgment. Lamenting the suggestion, the chubby guy asks for forgiveness from the girl and defines his own appearance as a terrifying sight. The boy dresses his shirt, uttering mental insults against the girls, while the protagonist watches everything in complete silence. Jinyoung enters into internal collapse upon realizing that Sunwoo just observed him shirtless in the center of the school. Acting on impulse, he applies a headlock on the chubby boy, holding him responsible for that embarrassment. Time advances, and the next morning establishes a busy atmosphere in the school's central courtyard during school hours. In the course of a new game, the boy gathers all his power and kicks the ball directly toward the net. However, this time Jumin blocks the play with tremendous ease, holding the ball without spending energy. The young man is totally perplexed upon realizing that his offensive was neutralized in such an easy way. Showing the ball trapped in his hands, the chubby goalkeeper brags about his impeccable defense before the team's best player. Holding the ball, his friend asks in a provocative way what is happening with Jinyoung that day. The teenager curses his own momentary lack of talent, complaining that his kicks are very weak. Settled on the bench, Jason notices that his partner doesn't seem to be at his peak today, and the young man agrees without hesitation. Frustrated with his performance, Jinyoung communicates the end of the first stage and resolves to rest briefly. He walks tiredly to the bleachers and sits on the stone steps to give his legs a break. Seeking breath with effort, the boy strives to retrieve the energies consumed in that initial phase of the match. An individual notices the young man's exhaustion and comments on his apparent weariness, forcing him to look quickly. Sunwoo appears adopting a quite friendly attitude, greeting her colleague as she gets close to the bleachers. Surprised by the unexpected arrival, Jinyoung stammers the beautiful girl's name. Next, he realizes the situation and lets out a scream of pure dread, frightened by her risky proximity. Without giving justifications, he jumps quickly to the lower tiers of the bleachers, leaving the young woman quite disoriented. She quickly questions the strange behavior, while the boy validates mentally that an old teaching was absolutely correct. His head travels to the past, recognizing that he never understood why she resembled a rock in his fantasy. Jinyoung turns his face, experiencing immense shame upon seeing her true beauty from that unfavorable angle. Curious about the distance, Sunwoo asks if he doesn't want to look at her face, forcing the boy to deny the confusion. The young man explains the old principle that people usually look ugly when seen from below up. Laughing at the excuse, the young woman projects her body and questions in a provocative way if she is indeed ugly. Led by the heat of the situation, Jinyoung speaks with extreme sincerity, declaring that she looks even more dazzling from that perspective. Silence reigns in the scene the moment the young man realizes the weight of the revelation he let out impulsively. The beautiful young woman limits herself to murmuring in agreement with the positive comment, while a heavy atmosphere of flirting is established in the place. The boy starts to sweat coldly due to nervousness, cursing his own tongue for having said something so direct. Jason appears sitting in the shadows, congratulating his partner ironically for having fallen completely into the young woman's seductive trap. Ignoring how to reverse the scenario, Jinyoung pleads for help from his illusory friend, who only praises the romantic retort. Without demonstrating any desire to help, Jason communicates that his friend will need to unfold himself on his own this time. Jinyoung holds his own head, lamenting the error, while the mentor realizes that any attempt at fixing it will only worsen the situation. In the face of that abrupt revelation, the young woman dives into a long period of silence. However, next, she props her face on her hand, showing that she finds the scenario quite funny. In the attempt to change course, the young man gives a staged cough and thanks for the previous compliment, noticing quickly that the strategy was terrible. The young woman reminds him that the compliment was only to be pleasant, while the young man asks himself if she will let the matter end there. Calmly, Sunwoo assures that hearing compliments is always gratifying, something the young man agrees to immediately. Next, she mentions that she frequently hears other students characterizing the young man as sexy and cool through the school hallways. Surprised, Jinyoung waves his hands in absolute nervousness, rejecting the idea of possessing such a reputation. Leaning forward, the young woman doubts his humility and admits to sharing the same opinion as the other students. The impact of the statement paralyses the boy, who stutters upon questioning in which aspect she considers him attractive. Creating a provocative mood, the beautiful young woman only agrees in an enigmatic way before delivering her conclusion. In the same instant, the student's imagination portrays him extremely strong and shirtless in the center of the courtyard. Soon after, the young woman waves her hand in a subtle way, dissipating the tension that hovered. Adopting a very provocative tone, Sunwoo gets very close and warns that she finds him formidable in all possible aspects. Totally surrendered by the approach, the young man freezes, with his face burning from so much embarrassment. Even the girl herself turns her vision, slightly blushing from the audacity of her own words. The charm is broken when Jumin yells from a distance, informing the beginning of the second part of the game. The boy turns his face disoriented upon listening to his friend, calling for him in the middle of the courtyard. Settled in the bleachers, Sunwoo raises her voice and cheers with enthusiasm for him to score one more goal. Already positioned on the lawn, the young man observes the young woman from afar as he aligns himself for the restart of the match. Internally, Jinyoung admits to the illusory partner that he has not the slightest idea of the reason for all of this. Controlling the ball with skill, he recognizes that he lacked total will to play in the first stage. Progressing quickly through the field and surpassing the rivals, the young man feels his body extremely light. Scratching his mustache with serenity, Jason pretends to be confused upon questioning how such a sudden change occurred. Sure of himself, the giant declares that his partner already knows perfectly the authentic answer to the enigma. The counselor indicates that all this sudden energy emerged purely and simply because the beautiful girl is watching the match. Adopting a more serious attitude, Jason wavers slightly for needing to contradict his own previous recommendation. Maintaining tranquility, the imaginary companion proposes that perhaps the situation can take a distinct turn now. With impressive vitality, Jinyoung fires a fulminating kick that sends the ball directly to the nets. The big guy partner deduces that perhaps the boy's small romantic delusions are not so bad in the end. The whole team vibrates intensely with the painting of a goal, congratulating the scorer for the formidable play. Contagious by the triumph and the compliments, Jinyoung lets out an authentic laugh of full happiness in the center of the field. Far away, Sunwoo asks the defeated archer not to be frustrated, however the boy promises never to forgive her. Without caring about the boy's drama, the young woman makes it clear she is considering the whole situation extremely comical. Seeing the scene from a distance, the boy celebrates in his mind the resounding success he obtained in the game. He realizes that the young woman seems even more beautiful that day, while Jason jokes saying that the boy is a lucky guy. Time runs quickly, and a new morning dawns serene in the residential neighborhood. Walking through the hallway of his own residence wearing his uniform, Jinyoung finds a debate in the living room. The young man parks confused near the door, asking what his parents mean by that dialogue. Settled at the table, his mother complains about a work problem that will make it impossible for the couple to use the invitations they acquired. Without knowing the destination of the entries, she suddenly notices her son there and calls him. The young man warns that he is leaving for school, but his mother quickly questions with worry if he has already had his coffee. He tries to create the excuse that he will snack on the way, but receives a sermon for not eating in an adequate way. Soon, a loud rumble comes from the student's stomach, forcing the poor guy to acknowledge his extreme hunger. Already sitting at the table tasting the meal, the young man ponders that eating beside his father always creates a somewhat dense environment. Enjoying an imaginary luxury banquet, Jason recommends that his friend eat well to stay strong. His mother remembers the tickets she received from the neighbor and proposes that her son enjoy the weekend. Holding the 2 entries for a theatrical spectacle, the young man hears the recommendation to call some friend to go along. His father clears his throat discontentedly, lamenting the fact that the family outing was ruined by excessive work. Already on the way to school, Jinyoung stares at the theater entries in his hands full of uncertainties. Pressed by the occasion, he tries intensely to decide who would be the perfect partner to take him on the outing. In his imagination, one of his classmates rejects the invitation instantly, claiming to be ill as an excuse. Another member of the sports group also appears in his mind, refusing the proposal due to being busy with training. To make matters worse, his head projects Jumin declaring with disdain that theatrical plays do not attract him at all. Returning to the real world in the school courtyard, the young man finds himself completely disoriented about which attitude to take. Walking beside Jumin, the boy mentions that he didn't even try to call him because he imagined that his friend only liked Japanese cartoons. The colleague changes his expression immediately, showing himself very offended, and swears that he doesn't even watch this type of animation. Without understanding the reason for such a harsh response, Jinyoung sees his colleague turn his back and leave toward the cafeteria. With arms crossed in the hallway, the young man wonders where he got the absurd assumption that his friend was fascinated by anime. Sitting serenely on the wall, Jason daydreams about the risk of cliches while his partner requests help. The muscular mentor asks what will be the next attitude, considering that all the young man's initial choices were eliminated. Taken by nervousness, the boy laughs in a bizarre way and repeats the questioning about whom he should invite. Looking at the young man with an intimidating attitude, the giant orders him to stop running from the subject and act with total sincerity with himself. The boy recoils scared the moment his companion hits the mark, declaring that his true desire is to invite Sunwoo. Stuttering a lot, Jinyoung tries to refute the declaration. However, the partner indicates that he lost his fear and cannot think of anyone else. Jason states that it is the moment to make a final resolution, while the teacher approaches stealthily from behind. Abruptly, the woman breaks the mental discussion by pronouncing the student's full name in the middle of the path. Adopting a firm posture, the teacher demands good manners, asking if the boy will not greet her in an adequate way. The protagonist notices that it is Han Jeol and asks for forgiveness quickly, while she mentions that he was talking alone there. Narrowing her vision in an investigative way, the woman asks directly if he possesses the habit of forging imaginary friends. The weight of that precise question throws the young man into absolute despair, without understanding how she discovered his greatest mystery. After the embarrassing approach, both end up sitting side by side on an isolated seat in the courtyard to dialogue better. The teacher asks if he is wanting to take a specific student to the theatrical play, and the boy nods in agreement, defeated. She then cites Sunwoo's name, talking about the girl's fame, and shocks the young man with the revelation. Entirely stunned, the young man stutters upon questioning the way the teacher found out about Sunwoo. Han Jeol makes a joke saying that she heard the whole rumor the day before, mentioning even the shameful compliment that he directed toward the young woman. Changing the mood of the dialogue abruptly, the woman adopts a considerably more serious posture. Going straight to the point, the teacher concludes that the young man is terrified of the possibility of suffering a rejection. Jinyoung looks away, feeling totally dejected, and confesses that this is the shameful truth. He tries to arrange an excuse, alleging that inviting the young woman in front of everyone is equivalent to calling her for a romantic date. The young man adds that such an attitude would configure itself as a declaration of love in practice. Even listening to the justifications, the teacher qualifies him as an excessively fearful boy. Exuding security, the woman declares that one day he will be grateful to her for this. Without warning, Han Jeol raises her tone of voice and calls Sunwoo by name in the center of the court. The teacher declares in a good tone that the young man possesses an urgent matter to treat, ordering the young woman to come to them. The boy is taken by a pure panic, without understanding where the young woman appeared there in such an abrupt way. Without demonstrating compassion, the woman exposes that he wishes to accompany her to a theatrical play on the weekend. The young woman's colleagues start to laugh, mocking the young man for having used the teacher to send his message. Han Jeol withdraws calmly, telling the beautiful girl to go talk to the boy. Sunwoo gets close, waving with enthusiasm, while the young man feels the universe crumble around him. His mind recalls that such an invitation is almost a love declaration, while the young woman asks about the spectacle. Approaching quite a bit, the young woman asks with an adorable tone if he indeed wants her to go along. The student remains absolutely motionless before that enchanting vision. Sweating from nervousness, he tries to organize an adequate answer, however he only manages to stutter. Completely captivated, the boy simply nods in a mechanical way. The weekend finally arrives, and the young man waits with anxiety in the combined location. With Jason supported on his shoulder, he ponders, marveling at the fact that he managed to go on a date with the beautiful student. The illusory partner gives him a scolding, ordering him to abandon this habit of agreeing with everything without reflecting. Jinyoung does not pay attention to the sermon and asks if he is with a very. Soon the boy tries to focus his vision and communicates that his image is not the priority at that instant. Adopting his colossal aspect, Jason asks about the young man's real intention with the girl. The mustachioed big guy declares, with arms crossed, that it is the moment to make a definitive choice. The mentor evaluates the scenario and declares that the young man's romantic affection is quite obvious. Jason concludes that, faced with such an explicit invitation, the young woman probably already noticed what his intentions are. The partner, of robust physical build, highlights that the young man suffers from an absurd fear of being dismissed. Jason warns that moving forward without caution can resurrect that same terrible nightmare of the past. Thoughtful Jinyoung reflects that abandoning these feelings at that moment would save him from facing his deepest fear. Irritated, he asks the illusory companion how on earth he will manage to ignore something he is already experiencing. A recollection arises in the young man's head, at the same time that the big guy states that he already acted this way before. The insane idea of visualizing the young woman as a simple stone statue returns to his mind. Using a welcoming tone, Jason attracts the colleague's attention. The friend communicates that, in case the decision is to preserve the petrified illusion due to fear, he will offer the guidelines for such. Sunwoo appears walking in a dazzling way on the street, while the big guy proposes the alternative of winning this trauma definitively. The teenager is absolutely enchanted with the beauty of the young woman who approaches. The mentor ensures he will give support to any choice and will strive to the maximum to help his old companion. The student parks before him, exuding enormous charm. The atmosphere becomes ideal between the pair on the street, while Jason orders his colleague to make his final decision. Jinyoung's head returns to the past, remembering that being rejected in love is an experience that everyone ends up passing through. The suffering of that old trauma resurfaces intensely with the memory of the initial moment in which he was repelled. The boy remembers his youth, recognizing that the tactic of turning girls into rocks was a brilliant idea. He reflects that the intimacy between individuals inevitably ends up generating romantic passions. However, preserving the fantasy of the stones, he is capable of simply preventing any desire for approach. Stretching his hand in the air, the young man laments intensely for his own lack of courage. Immersed in his melancholic memories, he assumes possessing a freezing fear of suffering a rejection. Returning to the current moment inside an exquisite cafeteria, the young woman calls the boy's attention. Sunwoo finds the situation very fun and makes a compliment to his refined posture upon drinking an espresso. Striving not to sound proud, he details that he only requested that drink for being the most economical option on the menu. The student points out that there is 1 hour until the beginning of the play, and the young man nods, saying he is quite excited. Taking a sip of the bitter drink, his mind resumes the discussion about the great problem imposed by Jason. The poor young man deduces that preserving the psychological barrier is the only form to ensure he will avoid the trauma of rejection. In counterpart, seeking to gain the affection of the beautiful young woman would demand facing all his traumas openly. Staring fixedly at his own cup, he fears not possessing the bravery required to take such an initiative. After all, the young man spent years hiding behind this flawless defensive wall. Observing the evident lack of focus of his partner, Sunwoo asks about what he is thinking so much. Surprised, Jinyoung creates a lie quickly, alleging that the terrible taste of the espresso left him spacey. The young woman does not believe the poorly made excuse, accusing her colleague of lying at that exact instant. She protests that he lost focus while he was before her, ordering him to choose a chocolate milk on the next occasion. Abruptly, Sunwoo cites the interval of 2 hours, leaving the young man very disoriented. The young woman clarifies that this was precisely the time she invested getting herself ready uniquely to meet him. Recalling the dedication before the mirror, she relates that it took a good time for her to choose the ideal outfit. The young woman demands that he cease the futile distractions after all the work she had. Leaning her body toward him, Sunwoo asks in an extremely charming way for him to focus uniquely on her. The boy absorbs the gravity of the scolding and recognizes intimately that he acted with much rudeness. Rising from the table, the young woman communicates that she will excuse him on this occasion only by the fact that he paid for the entries. With the hour of the spectacle near, she calls the young man to head without delays to the theater. Walking next to her, the young man resolves to leave his anguishes aside and enjoy the outing. Already inside the immense theater, the classic environment becomes alive on the stage before the spectators. The lead actress performs with great dramatic flair, asking the heavens the reason for her love's name being Romeo. The actor replies with an entirely funny and annoyed face, replying that the blame for this is his mother's. The theatrical spectacle follows with a theatrical actor censoring the woman character for not knowing something so evident. Absolutely concentrated on the plot, Sunwoo makes compliments to the main character while Jinyoung lets out a yawn of pure boredom. Upon withdrawing from there, the young woman contemplates a stuffed animal in the machine, and the young man promptly proposes trying to rescue it. However, the attempt results in an economic failure with him blowing $20 in sequence without managing to catch anything. In the karaoke, Jinyoung sings very badly, which makes the student give contagious laughter of that terrible exhibition. Subsequently, the two share a dessert in a cafe, and the young man divides delicately a slice of cake for her. Already walking through the streets at night, the young man tries to start a dialogue regarding her bond with an old friend. The atmosphere between the couple follows very serene as they walk together through the illuminated streets of the neighborhood. Enjoying the night wind, both preserve a calm walk in the extensive return path to the residence. Close to the destination location, the young man gives a sigh of relaxation and points out that the day was quite pleasant. Sunwoo demonstrates gratitude for the company until her dwelling, and her colleague retorts that it was no inconvenience. Thus, he longs for her to enter in a safe form, and the young woman nods immediately. However, the young woman stays stopped in that same place, staring at the young man in a completely silent way. The young man gets scared with the pause, and the student asks if he has nothing more to say at that instant. Sweating cold with anxiety, Jinyoung seeks to reveal how much he liked to spend all that time together with her. In his thoughts, the young man wants to communicate the desire to go out another time exclusively with her. Staring at the young woman there motionless, he wishes deeply that she agrees with a new invitation. Noticing the long disconnection of the boy, Sunwoo pronounces his name to bring him back to the real world. Devoid of bravery to confess, Jinyoung simply emits an extremely unnatural and afflicted laugh. Passing his hand on his head without a way, he says goodbye, stating he will see her at school, which leaves the young woman quite disoriented. Irritated with the delay, she gives a touch to her colleague, asking the reason for so much unnecessary lack of security. Turning his back right at that hour, the student warns that she is in fact going away and gives the subject as closed. The boy remains motionless on the sidewalk, observing the girl distance herself little by little along the street. Starting to walk alone, he laments for not having had the capacity to say that he wished to meet her again. The boy recognizes to himself that the fear of dealing with a romantic rejection still remains very powerful. Fantasizing negative results in his head, he despairs upon visualizing his colleague refusing a new outing. Jinyoung tries to persuade himself that backing away is the safest alternative to avoid a gigantic nuisance ahead. He argues logically that that date wasn't even his suggestion, but a direct ambush by the teacher Han Jeol. The young man deduces, with quite a lot of drama, that the young woman only agreed to go out due to pure pressure of the context. Determined not to relive the nightmare of the past, the boy swears to train to return to seeing her as a rock. The teenager reinforces his own promise, agreeing that he needs to raise this psychological blockage as quickly as possible. Abruptly, the young woman's voice resonates in his memory, ordering him to ask for something distinct from coffee on the next occasion. The boy stops walking at that same hour, realizing the impact of those words, returning intensely. Aiming quickly backward, he sees Sunwoo static on the street, staring at him from a distance. Adopting an adorable posture, the young woman recommends that he try a coffee with chocolate on the next date. The effect of that sentence hits the boy in full, leaving him entirely without knowing how to react. Exactly at this moment of suspense, the imaginary counselor appears, suddenly initiating a subject. Settled face to face in the mental darkness, Jason questions if the decision to treat her as a rock is final. The big guy partner guarantees total support, admitting that fleeing also represents a way of facing dread. Jinyoung pronounces his colleague's name, remembering the instant in which he took this identical attitude 5 years ago. Frustrated with his own lack of bravery, the young man questions how his image is before his friend at that exact instant. The partner analyzes the conjuncture and exposes in a harsh way that his friend needed other people to manage a date. Jason enumerates in a ruthless way all the humiliating distractions and cowardly retreats of the boy during that day. Showing his finger, the counselor evidences the uncalled-for terror that the young man experiences upon approaching the girl. Ending the painful sermon, the partner condemns the proposal of simply returning to see the young woman as a rock. Seeking to soften the tense environment, the counselor asks for forgiveness for the severity of the words, claiming to be only being realistic. Moving his shoulders, the bulky partner highlights that this is the purest truth regarding the whole conjuncture. Jinyoung expresses a small smile of resignation and admits intimately that he is, in fact, an immense loser. Without thinking twice, he approaches and holds the friend's hands firmly in the center of the path. Looking at the girl fixedly in the eyes, the boy calls Sunwoo by name with great firmness. The girl gets scared with the abrupt physical approach and emits a confused sound. Breaking the silence, Jinyoung apologizes and promises to lead her to a theatrical spectacle much more exciting on the next occasion. The boy justifies the proposal as a request for forgiveness, given that the outing of that day was boring to the point of making her fall asleep. The young woman assimilates the surprise invitation with a face of total shock. Shortly after, she closes her eyes and laughs in a genuine way, judging the attitude very adorable. Excited with the partner's bravery, Sunwoo admits that she was already waiting for him to say that for quite a long time. The young man strives to explain better, ensuring once again that the future destination will be much more lively. He laments again by the fact that she had fallen asleep from so much boredom in the course of the spectacle of that day. The girl blinks, disoriented with the reiteration of the same embarrassing excuse in the course of the dialogue. However, the boy's nervousness ends up being contagious, and she bursts into laughter again with the scenario. Speaking with total frankness, the student admits that she was in fact waiting for that second romantic invitation. Suddenly, the joy passes, and the young man notices an essential detail in the position of the two. He realizes that he followed pressing the girl's two hands with much intensity in the course of the whole conversation. The shock hits Jinyoung immediately, forcing him to let out a scream of total panic for his own petulance. Letting go of the girl quickly, he stammers asking for forgiveness for the precipitous act, while she requests tranquility amidst laughter. In a gentle way, Sunwoo asks him to behave in a more spontaneous way on the next date, ensuring she is in expectation of the compromise. Turning his back with much joy, the girl says for him to arrive with safety at home, and the young man returns the same wish. The boy remains motionless, holding his chest with his heart racing after that intense instant. The beautiful young woman travels the path to her residence, adopting a soft and deeply calm posture. In a final enchanting gesture, she launches a gaze over her shoulder, demonstrating a gigantic tranquility. The clearing of the day reveals a sunny morning in the vast student complex of the city. Seeking breath with great effort, the young man directs all his attention to physical training. The boy utilizes the metallic structure of the school park to perform several intense pull-ups. He recognizes in his thoughts that he always resorts to arduous training when his head is overloaded with many subjects. Recalling the touch on her hands, Jinyoung seeks to consume all the accumulated tension, exercising without pauses. Maintaining focus on the training, the young man resolves to overcome the terror of rejection in order to reach proximity with Sunwoo. Next, his illusory colleague praises his attitude of courage, obtaining a quick recognition from the boy. However, Jinyoung recognizes that the mission is quite complex and wonders how on earth he will manage to generate such intimacy. Sukyoung appears suddenly questioning how many series still remain, while the boy, breathless, responds that only 3 are missing. The young man laments in silence that his joints start to ache every time he tries to execute that movement. Immediately, the girl gets quite close from behind and calls the boy a kid. Jinyoung takes a huge scare and asks afflicted about her identity, while the young woman only gives an instigating laugh. Sustaining a calm pose with her sports attire, the friend introduces herself pronouncing her own name. Sukyoung mentions with enthusiasm the enormous chance of crossing with the young man precisely in that park. Still a bit disoriented, the boy repeats her name, striving to assimilate the information. The young man's brain quickly joins the pieces and he recognizes her as Sunwoo's colleague, even though under the effect of rock. Taking advantage of the situation, the friend orders him to repeat the movements on the bar, disregarding his confusion toward her demand. Without many options, Jinyoung complies with the bizarre request and places himself again on the local equipment. However, the young woman emits a scream of absolute despair upon analyzing the form as he performs the exercise. Irritated with the scary style, Sukyoung gives a push on the young man, asking who would perform a training in that manner. Knocked to the floor, the boy rubs his painful head and questions the reason for that aggression without motives. The young woman communicates that horrible technique will only destroy his joints, instead of providing health. Without delays, Sukyoung orders the young man to wait right there while she goes to change her clothing quickly. The boy tries to debate that he still needs to conclude the training, however she cuts him with much lack of patience. Reaffirming the command in a direct way, the friend orders him to stay stopped there, forcing him to agree instantly. Alone near the bar, Jinyoung cannot understand what is the big annoyance of that girl. Abruptly, Jason appears adopting an imposing posture and warns that the scenario represents an excellent opportunity. The young man asks about the idea, and the giant recalls the old strategy of battle, referring to studying the opponent. The counselor points out that this is the opportunity to obtain data about Sunwoo, in the same way they tried with that chubby colleague. Jason details that previously the intention was only to learn to deal with the young woman's charm, but now the objective is to approach her in fact. Understanding the ideal strategy, Jinyoung concludes that he should perform informal questions regarding his friend to Sukyoung. The young man approves the idea, considering that the young woman will certainly bring much more utility than the chubby boy of before. Soon after that mental dialogue, the young woman returns to the park walking with a quite calm pace. Jinyoung notices the change and asks regarding the new clothing, identifying quickly that the sneakers and the pants were exchanged. Sukyoung gets irritated, believing that he wants to cause confusion, but the boy asks for forgiveness, saying that she resembles a rock. Disregarding the bizarreness in the young man's vision, the young woman orders him to execute a pull-up on the bar for her to evaluate the movement. Putting the strategy into practice, the young man asks in a direct way if Sukyoung possesses great intimacy with her colleague. The young woman attests to the tie, judging the inquiry very sudden, however soon understands the real meaning of everything. Exhibiting a malicious smile, Sukyoung hits the target in a precise way and declares that her partner is completely in love with Sunwoo. Jinyoung enters total panic, trying to refute the love, creating the excuse that it was only a silly inquiry of the moment. The young woman knocks down the faked argument right at that hour, ensuring that even a random bird would notice that romantic charm. Indicating a bird that was passing there, she ironizes the scene while the boy asks from where that animal appeared. Sukyoung adopts a more serious tone and warns that winning the affection of her colleague will not be an easy mission at all. She agrees that the great fame of her partner hinders the life of the suitors quite a lot. Maintaining a reflective attitude, the young woman seeks the adequate words and classifies her friend as someone very enigmatic. Sukyoung clarifies that Sunwoo has the habit of being incredibly amiable and charismatic with all the individuals at school. The student points out that the two in fact spend the greater part of the day together. However, despite such daily coexistence, the friend confesses that she has not the slightest idea of what passes through the young woman's mind. She says that even chatting and playing constantly, Sunwoo almost never divides details regarding her private life. In this way, Sukyoung deduces that the beautiful young woman passes the intense impression of guarding many mysteries from everyone around. Not obstant the mystery, she affirms to be the greatest partner of the young woman and advises the boy to get ready for quite a lot of emotional turmoil. Jinyoung recalls that the chubby colleague spoke something quite similar before, asking if he is ignoring some vital information. The young woman loses patience, telling him to go quickly to the bar, while the young man ponders that he never felt such heavy energy coming from Sunwoo. Without warning, Sukyoung gives a kick on his back, ordering him to stop daydreaming. The young woman breathes in a breathless way, protesting for needing to train her partner, and asks if he at least possesses any sports aptitude. The young man asks if he appears to possess little physical strength, but the young woman recalls that he looks like a rock, making it impossible to analyze the vigor. Resolved to show her utility, the young woman removes her jacket, exposing her exercise attire. Sukyoung declares with enormous conviction that it may even sound common, but she is excellent in physical practice. Showing quite a lot of charm in a powerful posture, the young woman makes a joke warning her partner not to end up falling in love with her. The protagonist observes that whole exhibition of security with a look of pure boredom and apathy. Due to his impenetrable mental defense, his friend continues looking only like a strange rock using exercise clothing. Being extremely direct, the young man declares that she is very conceited, something that the young woman confirms without the slightest inhibition. Away from the location, the environment follows quite calm with the passage of individuals walking along the roads full of trees in the park. A little ahead, a lady carries some bags full through the wooded space in a carefree manner. The gymnastics teacher walks along the exercise road, using comfortable attire in the company of a student. Walking next to the teacher, the young woman calls attention, starting a gossip conversation. The student questions if Han Jeol doesn't secretly consider one of the teachers charming, shocking the woman with her preference for older subjects. Protecting the teacher's appearance, the young woman swears that he didn't even reach 30 years, while the teacher ironizes his figure. The two quickly notice Jinyoung and Sukyoung practicing exercises near there, and the student notes that that pair has not the slightest harmony. Han Jeol lowers her cap and analyzes silently the lamentable exercise of the students. Emitting a long sigh of discontentment, the instructor loses her head and shouts, ordering the young man to stop using the momentum. With her gaze glued to the scene, she examines the terrible movement of the young man struggling on the bar. Sukyoung continues pressing Jinyoung's back, demanding that he utilize the correct power and grab himself with strength on both sides. The severe young woman yells that only 3 movements remain, ignoring completely the pleas for mercy of the exhausted poor guy. Contributing with her own load, the young woman pushes her friend upward in an immense effort to finalize the pull-up. The teacher of the discipline only looks at that radical and sad action without managing to emit any word. Losing her head due to the delay of the partner, Sukyoung kicks the young man far away, grumbling that he is driving her crazy. Without stopping, the young woman assumes the command and holds the metal structure firmly to offer a demonstrative class. Settled in the structure, she guides her friend that the pure power must come entirely from the back. Exhibiting all her physical skill, the young woman performs the movement in an impeccable way, teaching the correct form of execution. Stunned, the young man asks if the task is complex and names her a useless rock. Sukyoung grumbles with anger when he questions what the difference is between her mode and his. Evaluating his friend on the bar, the young man lets out a scream of astonishment before her sports aptitude. Repentantly, Sunwoo appears out of nowhere, praising her friend with great excitement. Sukyoung takes a huge scare with the abrupt emergence in the park. The protagonist stays stunned to see the beautiful young woman running happy in the direction of them, waving with her hand. In sequence, Sukyoung asks what the young woman is doing in the location. Jinyoung ponders silently that the girl possesses the habit of appearing in places in a sudden way. The young woman clarifies that she was only instructing the young man to execute the movement correctly. Finding it funny, Sunwoo says that her friend cannot avoid giving recommendations. Alternating the topic, the beautiful girl indicates a rooster scratching near there and finds the animal adorable. Sukyoung recognizes that she has no idea from where the creature appeared. In this way, the focus of the recently arrived young woman falls on the colleague who remains silent. She waves her hand in a super friendly way, greeting the young man. Sweating from anxiety, Jinyoung stutters, returning the gesture. Marveling at the apparatus, the young woman questions in what way they manage to perform the activity, confessing that only keeping herself suspended is already a great challenge for her. The boy quickly recalls the chronic anemia frame of the student. He asks if she is joking with him and asks for forgiveness right after. Disregarding the comment, Sukyoung offers help in case her partner wishes to test the activity too. The young woman agrees, finding the idea interesting. Taking advantage of the opportunity, the training companion orders that the protagonist stay exactly before them to enumerate the repetitions. He only nods, stuttering. Already positioned on her colleague's back, Sukyoung recommends that she does not feel fear and pull the body in a quite slow way on the bar. The young woman agrees calmly with the warning. Applying a gigantic effort, Sunwoo complains that the activity continues being quite complex, even receiving help. Suddenly, the beautiful student widens her eyes upon noticing an unexpected detail in the middle of the exercise. It happens that the young man finds himself stopped precisely before her, waiting with patience to enumerate the movements. Staring at the girl from close, the boy blinks, marveling at the enchanting image that he observes. The crossing of gazes so frontal and sudden makes the girl's face burn with embarrassment. Without understanding the paralysis, Sukyoung demands that the friend act, reminding her to pull the body. Totally embarrassed, the young woman emits a disoriented sound. Performing an extreme force, the young woman seeks to finalize the movement while the colleague pushes her upward continuously. In the instant in which she manages to surpass the chin of the iron, she ends up crossing the gaze directly with the protagonist one more time. Striving to hide the dense atmosphere, the young man does not take his eyes off her and breaks the silence, asking about the random bird of yesteryear. The inopportune inquiry leaves the young woman absolutely silent, while the redness on her face grows even more. With anxiety dominating, the young woman ends up staying without strength in her hands and slips from the metal structure in a startle. Without managing to hold herself, she collapses abruptly, giving a scream of terror, and ends up falling with weight on her own friend. The protagonist witnesses the tragic and completely unpredictable situation, without being capable of understanding the motive of the disaster. Pressed against the earth, the friend questions the reason for the pair to be with those bizarre expressions. The two culprits remain entirely silent. Jinyoung uses the opportunity to hold the young woman's anemia responsible, alerting that she should not force so much. Fallen, the colleague grumbles, contesting the boy. In despair for the damage, Sunwoo stands up, quickly pleading for forgiveness and verifying if her friend is hurt. Sukyoung only murmurs from pain in the grass. The injured friend protests, saying that the colleague was distracted during the activity, while the boy in glasses barely enumerated the movements in an adequate way. Sustaining the acting to camouflage the romantic atmosphere, the protagonist claims to have lost patience due to their slowness. Irritated with the boy's insolence, Sukyoung holds both by the head simultaneously, swearing to destroy their lives right there. The afflicted scream of apologies from the beautiful young woman resonates through the park as the violent attack occurs in the open air. In little time the hours advance, and the end of the day paints the school's firmament with an orange coloration, quite calm. After the enormous disorder, the boy and the girl walk side by side through the quiet streets, returning to the home. Initiating the dialogue, the boy cites that physical activity left him tired. The young woman only nods, relating that in the end she didn't even perform the exercise. Immediately, the protagonist proposes that it would be fantastic if she studied some exercises with her partner later. Sunwoo assures that she will consider the hypothesis. In his reflections, the young man recalls the excellent strategy of studying the opponent. He laments not having verified practically nothing about the life of his colleague that day. The strong, illusory partner appears, making an affirmative gesture, ratifying that tactics like that need to evolve in a gradual way, and attesting that the activity was recreational. Reaching a crossroad on the street, the young woman points the direction, indicating that she will follow along that route. The boy agrees immediately. She waves, saying goodbye in an adorable way, and assures that they will meet at school the next day. Surprised, Jinyoung only emits the greeting. Noticing the young man's doubt stopped there, the young woman focuses on him again, questioning if he, by chance, does not wish to express something. The boy refutes her doubt promptly, ensuring that there is absolutely nothing. The young woman stares at him, quite disoriented with the bizarre atmosphere. Without giving so much relevance to the fact, she opens soon, a smile very amiable and captivating for her colleague. Resuming her path, the beautiful girl warns that she only questioned out of curiosity and says goodbye again, while the young man waves. Completely upset with his own behavior, the young man hits his chest, cursing the deplorable way how he separated from the young woman. The muscular counselor appears, emitting a deep sigh of pure frustration. Uncomfortable, the boy asks about the reason for such a lack of spirit. The big guy fixes his mustache and recognizes that he is also not capable of understanding totally how a girl's heart operates. However, Jason emphasizes having a very strong intuition that his friend just gave the worst reply imaginable for the young woman. Jinyoung stays lost with the speech. Walking toward the dwelling, the young man demands to discover which part of the dialogue was a mistake, ordering the companion to reveal the truth soon. Irritated with the riddle, Jinyoung complains of his partner for frequently performing these imbecile pointings in the worst instance, demanding at least one solid justification for that. Abruptly, Sukyoung appears on the route, scaring the boy again. He jumps of terror, wishing to know for how long the colleague has been behind him there. Disregarding the response, Sukyoung starts the narration of a mysterious tale. She describes that one time she went up to the top of the school on a night quite dark. The young woman relates that it must have been about 21 hours, and that she presumed that only certain teachers could be roaming the deserted location at that height. However, the calm of the environment was broken in an abrupt way in the story of the curious young woman. She details that, from the most complete nothing, the sound of someone playing piano started to resonate in a very clear way from the top of the school. Aware that the musical room is located on the highest floor, the student relates to have stayed very curious about who would be utilizing the equipment so late. The atmosphere of the tale becomes dense when the young woman exposes that soon after, a shiver of authentic dread ran through her spine. She breaks the atmosphere of fear, counting that the shiver happened uniquely because the music was so beautiful and fantastic that it left her absolutely enchanted. Back to the school hallways, the protagonist and Jumin observe the girl with expressions of total boredom after listening to the story without logic. Jinyoung criticizes the theatrical way as the colleague told the fact. He admits to having stayed apprehensive, imagining that it would be a true horror narrative. In the young man's head, Jason trembles of fear, holding his knees. He equates the tension to a horrific war, while the boy asks about his friend's fear. Returning to the theme, the protagonist gets intrigued and asks who was the secret brilliant mind on the piano, admired with such a hidden gift in the school. The chubby young man interferes in the chat, asking if Sukyoung in fact does not have knowledge about the situation. The young woman stays quite lost with the questioning. Making enormous suspense, the student comments about the known legend of the ghost of the music room that haunts the school. The young woman gets astonished with the declaration. Jumin narrates that in the past a student had the habit of remaining alone in the musical room, utilizing the piano every night in a continuous way. The gossip decretes in a brusque way that the unfortunate student ended up losing her life in the place. Sukyoung enters in shock, wishing to discover the reason for such a disaster. The macabre rumor relates that the girl choked with a candy at the same time in which she played. The student criticizes the scarcity of details of this legend told in such a precarious way. The boy finalizes the scary rumor, exposing that, since that date, it is possible to hear the piano sounding alone during the early morning in the unoccupied room. Adopting a theatrical and obscure posture, Jumin finishes stating that the beautiful music that the colleague heard at the top was certainly the spectacle of the choked soul. A shameful silence takes over the hallway as the pair of boys stare at the student. Sukyoung murmurs, trying to assimilate the story without sense. The protagonist crosses his arms, exhibiting an expression of absolute disgust, disapproving of the terrible level of that ghost story created by his gossiping friend. He emits a grunt of outside embarrassment, feeling the bizarreness of that school myth built in such a bad way. Catching the young man by surprise, Sukyoung starts to tremble of dread, covering her mouth with her hand. She recognizes to have found the legend terrifying, leaving him stunned. Evaluating his friend tremble, Jinyoung deduces that Sunwoo in fact does not tolerate macabre narratives and guards a very fearful facet. Suddenly, the decided voice of Hanjeol resonates through the hallway, summoning the pair of students by name. The educator celebrates the ideal instant and requests help in the teacher's room if they are not busy. Sukyoung accepts promptly to go with the woman while the group walks along the path. Right behind, the chubby guy asks his colleague if that ghost story was true, recognizing that he had never heard anything regarding that. The gossiping young man recognizes with vanity that he forged everything at the moment, only to observe the expression of terror of the girls. Content with the falsity, Jumin highlights that Sunwoo seemed truly terrified by the scary legend. Listening to the absurdity, the young woman only stares at the boy's back in complete silence. Devoid of any patience, Sukyoung judges intimately the boy as a true mental patient. The night finally arrives at the school, bringing an atmosphere much more serene and silent. Walking exhausted, the young man points out that helping to check the exams was very exhausting, and extols the dedication of the teacher. Next to him, the beautiful young woman walks entirely mute and immersed in her own reflections. Afflicted with his colleague, Jinyoung questions if there is something wrong, noticing immediately her discouraged countenance. Taken by surprise, Sunwoo seeks to camouflage the anxiety, grabbing his arm and promising that there is nothing wrong. The young man soon concludes that the fear is resulting from that silly story of the chubby friend. However, the young woman denies it right at that hour. Applying small pats on the young man, the young woman alleges that hauntings do not exist in real life and promises not to be with any fear. Jinyoung notices his colleague walking trembling in her entirety, identifying that the story of the girl choked with the candy impacted her in truth. Suddenly, a light music starts to resonate in an enigmatic way through the unoccupied areas. The boy freezes, immediately wanting to understand what is the origin of that piano sound. He finds it bizarre, the melody sounding so late at night, and concludes that the sound originates from the artistic room. Noticing the precise correspondence with the legend, the young man seeks to persuade himself that it is unfeasible to be an authentic ghost. Seeking a rational justification, he imagines it to be merely some student practicing until later. In this, a dark and enigmatic shape appears static in the center of the dark path right before the pair. The atmosphere becomes totally dense before that strange appearance in the bottom of the school building. Striving to preserve tranquility, Jinyoung asks if there still exists someone roaming through the building at that schedule. The beautiful young woman enters a level of absolute terror, shaking continuously and without the capacity to articulate any sentence. The despair grows when the bizarre shape starts to slide without making noise toward the pair. Incapable of supporting the mental tension, the young woman lets out a deafening scream of pure dread. Afflicted, the girl escapes in high speed, going down the staircase and yelling regarding the haunting of the choked girl. The young man runs accompanying her, demanding explanations from his colleague who only asks for help during the path. Running amidst the darkness, Jinyoung reproves the uncontrolled escape of the young woman while the bizarre shape follows in the location. The enigmatic figure shows itself to be only the educator Han Jeol, who stays disoriented about the reason for the young people running from her. Using dark clothing due to the absence of light, the teacher asks seriously if her figure is found so scary like that. The teacher lets out a sigh, bored with the bizarre conjuncture and the great confusion originated. On the outside part of the school, the cold night takes over the neighborhood with the headlights of the buildings brightening the view. Fleeing from the building, the protagonist opens the metal gate with everything and finally reaches the region of the school's rooftop. Completely breathless due to the intense running, the young man seeks to retrieve the breath spent. He immediately pronounces the young woman's name and finds her entirely thrown on the hard floor of the environment. Crouched near her, the boy asks about what happened and proposes that the terrible anemia attacked again because of the staircase. Disregarding the fatigue, the young woman focuses on the threat and exposes in a state of panic that something dark went for her over there in the interior. Jinyoung seeks to appease the scenario, holding responsible the rumor of the chubby friend. However, the music restarts in a simultaneous way. Both freeze at the hour upon hearing the mysterious melody resonating through the open space of the rooftop. The boy considers it absurd someone utilizing the piano so late, and understands in what form the macabre tales gain proportion at school. Observing the student shake of dread holding her own clothing, he experiences the urgency of tranquilizing her. From the most complete nothing, the giant Jason appears, declaring that whole scary environment is, in reality, ideal. The young man asks about the madness, and the mentor clarifies to be the golden opportunity to seek Sunwoo's proximity. The muscular partner explains that a scared young woman alone with a boy forms the ideal environment for love to flow. The tense climate at the top of the building forms a particular environment that unites the two organically under the light of the moon. The young man processes the orientation and starts to understand the romantic tactic of his illusory companion. Next to him, the girl follows, seeking air with much difficulty due to the enormous shock. Even with fear, the beautiful young woman confesses that whole dark context scares quite a lot in truth. Staring at the defenseless colleague, Jinyoung recalls a theory of psychology very known. The young man determines mentally that that instant of tension says respect to the famous effect of the suspension bridge. Focused on the plan, the protagonist centralizes his efforts in his goal of stealing the young woman's heart. The strong breathing of the young woman evidences that she was not capable of relaxing entirely. She returns to relate her own fear and ensures that the night atmosphere of the school gives quite a lot of fear. Jinyoung nods silently that the fear in conjunction is the ideal stimulus for the effect of the suspension bridge. The boy arranges himself to take advantage of the adrenaline of the risk in favor of his own juvenile. Sure, he recalls the academic knowledge that radical contexts mix the human head. The daydream in his head justifies that the chest beating fast because of the threat ends up creating the false impression of a sweeping love. The hero gives up quickly of the brilliant tactic, noticing that the piano music is festive too much to sustain the environment of terror. Observing the young woman, he notices that her countenance relaxed a lot, and the terror already went away definitively. Striving to initiate a chat, The young man makes compliments to the musical talent of the haunting, and the young woman nods, laughing at the joke. Evaluating the rhythm, Sunwoo recognizes the music as a waltz, leaving the young man astonished with her wisdom. The girl counts in a quite calm way that she performed dance of salon practices at the time of childhood. She describes that she had the habit of dancing next to the chubby colleague, but hated the partnership and made constant scenes because of that. Asked if she still trains the art, the young woman refuses, declaring to like more of art's practices and mentioning the problem of the illness. To the young man's astonishment, the beautiful young woman exposes that the gossiping boy is an authentic prodigy in the art of dancing. The protagonist stays amazed, striving to visualize how on earth an individual with that chubby physical build could dance well. Abandoning the metal colleague, Jinyoung relates that salon dance sounds like something quite recreational and completely distant from his world. The young woman puts her hand on her chin, reflective, admitting not to recall much due to having occurred in the preschool phase. Adopting a spectacularly captivating posture, she enjoys the free background melody made available by the musician Ghost. Without ceremonies, the young woman advances a step and demands that the companion cede his hand to her. Caught entirely unprepared in the location, the boy stutters from nervousness and only complies with the young woman's demand. The hands of both finally meet under the firmament of the night, accompanied by the beautiful enigmatic waltz. Giving sequence to the passionate climate, the hero grabs his partner's hand with strength and communicates that everything is ready. The beautiful student details the next movement of the choreography, while the boy wavers an instant. However, the boy's lack of agility predominates and he steps with strength on her foot, tearing a scream of pain. The poor young man enters into despair and pleads infinite pardons, while the young woman holds her injured leg, uttering curses of pain. He asks if the girl is fine, and she soon recalls that her limb has not yet healed from the blow given by Sukyeon. Striving not to ruin the instant, she stretches her hand again and orders that they test one more time. The student requests that her colleague make a turn, something that he seeks to perform in the most clumsy way imaginable. With this, the protagonist's heel ends up twisting in an incorrect way during the movement. Incapable of holding the posture, the young man collapses to the floor while the companion emits a scream of fright. The young woman starts to laugh, witnessing the failure, and he complains that his nose still feels the old blow. The environment quickly pacifies, and the beautiful student observes her colleague exhibiting a very amiable countenance. She proposes that they try to perform the dance one more time, obtaining the instantaneous approval of the young man. Changing the tone in an abrupt way, the girl swears to break his foot if one more step happens, forcing him to plead apologies. Upon standing up from the floor, the protagonist gives an anxious laugh and requests that she instruct him correctly. Absolutely concentrated, the young man stretches his hand in a fine posture and asks in what way one requests an invitation to dance. The sudden and romantic posture of the young man leaves the student entirely silent for some seconds. Fascinated with the partner's charm, she emits a weak murmur of fascination. Agreeing with the invitation on the enlightened roof, the young woman states that she also hopes to receive his care during the dance. The young man stays absolutely amazed, looking at the young woman's beauty under the glare of the moonlight. Enjoying the calm moment, Sunwoo talks regarding the celebrated legend of the ghost of the music area. The history recalls that no person at school had science regarding who originated that enigmatic nightly song. In little time, the sonic mystery acted as the perfect material to elaborate tales of haunting among the school community. However, the illusory mentor ponders that the same frightening song ended up conquering a different finality at that instant. With the pair executing the dance under the sky filled with stars, the music of the spirits converted itself into an authentic, passionate gift. The gigantic educational building follows silent, protecting the unique instant on the rooftop. Walking through the galleries of the school to return, Jinyoung starts a conversation with his colleague in a quite informal way. He asks if the girl continues practicing drawing, and she attests in a quick way that yes. Enthusiastic, the boy requests that she create the drawing of a muscular and mustachioed subject in the future, swearing to return the favor. The young woman reveals that she does not have much talent drawing human figures, but swears she will try to create the work in the future. The protagonist thinks silently that he did not have the slightest notion of that artistic aptitude of the young woman. Following her rhythm, the young man starts to reflect if there did not exist anything else that he wished to perform. Abruptly, the young woman interrupts her steps and communicates that she needs to give a slight stop in the restroom. She distances herself along the path without light, while the partner asks if there is no danger of her walking alone. Evaluating the young woman disappearing in the shadows, the young man considers such sudden bravery quite bizarre. He recalls that she remained terrified moments before, however now transits through the building without the slightest dose of terror. Scratching his face, the young man seeks to infer if the young woman only ended up getting used to the macabre climate of the environment. In this, the imaginary counselor appears adopting a quite skeptical posture and considers the scenario suspicious. Jinyoung does not understand the doubt, and the big guy recalls the great tactic of the suspension bridge that they plan to put into practice. Analyzing everything, Jason supposes that the strategy of love grounded in terror possibly solves the riddle. The partner proposes that the psychological impact was already governing the girl's head during that whole period. From a distance, the beautiful young woman adjusts her makeup in front of the restroom mirror with quite a lot of peace. She emits a quick laugh ridiculing the tale of the music area, attesting that spirits are unreal. Complaining internally about her painful foot, the young woman curses her partner as a clumsy monster exhibiting pure charm. In the meantime, an entrance containing the sign of the music class makes a slight noise in the back part of the school gallery. The educator Han Jiol opens the door wanting to discover if the individual already finished practicing the apparatus. Stopped in the opening, the woman warns that the schedule is already quite advanced and orders the student to collect her belongings to go home. The situation shows a student with short hair settled before the piano while the teacher speaks her name. Absolutely immersed in the shadows, the young woman named Yojin emits only a simple murmur exposing great melancholy. The student requests in a low voice the chance of executing only one more song. However, the teacher protests, stating that she cannot listen to her words. After the shameful supplication of the girl for forgiveness, the teacher agrees and decides to finalize the works right there.